Today I'm going to be talking about capital budgeting and how to increase the company APV. So to start, you can check the snapshot and see that our revenue is $245, operating income is $22, and net income is about $13.5. So our three divisions are pretty important when we're looking at discounts and how they're going to affect cash flows. And when you look at them, you see that they affect it in different ways. Licensing does produce the most operating profit, but production takes up the most assets. And retail brings in the most revenue. So when we're analyzing our choices, we want to look at a couple different things. First of all, the end goal is to have our net income increasing throughout the future projections, as well as cash flows. So when we're looking at these numbers, we want to make sure that the operations that we're bringing in, when we take away investments and financing, we're still ending with a positive cash balance. So when we go over to project details, something that we want to keep in mind is the discount rate, because that can affect all of our numbers, including net present value, internal rate of return, and profitability. So just clicking on a selected project. For production, using the company discount rate, you see that net present value is 6.8, profitability is 3.1. But if you go to, this is a low risk project, if you go to a lower discount rate, you'll see that these numbers do increase. Now this can be good, this can be bad, just depending on the lifetime of the project and all the other numbers that are involved. So going to the project, when we're making our decisions, we want to keep these numbers in mind. So we don't really want any projects that are going to have a significant payback, because we're really not going to see that on our financial statements for quite some time. You do want a high net present value because that is showing that it's going to increase your company's value the most. If you have a project with a lower net present value, it's not going to increase the value of your company as much as one with a higher. When we're looking at profitability index, this is also something to consider, because for every number that is higher than 1, you're going to actually be making a profit. So when we're selecting our projects, we want low payback years, high profitability, high NPV, and a high internal rate of return. Something else to consider is the earnings before income taxes, depreciation, all those kinds of things. Because if it's negative, it may show some significant impacts. So we're going to go ahead and select these 4 projects, and we still are going to have a little bit of the budget left. We don't have to spend the whole budget every time, but we can. So for these projects, as you can see, payback is less than 10. I usually try and pick the projects that are less than 10 so we can see that money coming back. The new doll and film DVD is actually a good project that has numbers that fit this example. Payback is quite low, so we're going to see that pretty soon. Profitability is very high, as well as internal rate of return, which means we are going to see that money that more than what we want, which is good. Net present value is also high. And as far as project costs, they are also significantly low compared to some of these other projects. So when we look, we did increase a little bit. Our revenue went up a little. Operating income did decrease, and so did net income, but we can recover from that. And if we look at our future projections on our income sheet and balance sheet, we'll see that we're still projected to increase our net income over time, which is where those other numbers will come into play, like lifetime costs and things like that. So, looking at cash flows, we still have a positive cash flow, which is what we want. Once again, these numbers are still pretty positive. Going to the historical finances is where we can compare these more closely. And we'll be doing this for the next few years. So we can see that our net income did decrease slightly, as well as our earnings before income taxes, but these are once again recoverable. Checking our project updates, we'll see why some of these things may have decreased. But to make our next selection, we should choose ones like these ones right here, greater than 10. These ones may not be the most profitable for the company. They could be, they could not be, but I'm probably not going to select them. I will probably select the ones that do have, once again, a higher NPV without having that huge payback. And we don't have to select all the projects every time, like I said before, but these ones do have lower payback years. This one's not quite 10, so I selected it. Profitability indexes still over 1, which means we are getting more than what we need to break even. So we once again increased a little bit, and as you can see here, our net income did finally increase past that 13 that we started with, as well as operating income and revenue. So this year, our operations were successful. Let's look at the historical finances. So as you can see, here's another more in-depth look. Our net income increased, as well as all of our assets and liabilities, things like that. Looking at the cash flows, we once again have a positive ending cash balance, and another positive, these numbers do look like they will be increasing from year to year. So, making our next set of decisions. When we want to look at this value again, see what projects may want to have lower or higher discount rates. So for this, a medium risk project, if we do decrease this discount rate, these numbers will increase, which is something that we do want. Not all of them will be things that we want, but looking at them, they do increase slightly. Not a lot as far as profitability index and things like that, but they will increase slightly. So looking at these, especially comparing these two where we can only select one, we'll want to see the electronic toy manufacturer does have a higher NPV than Children's Magazine, as well as internal rate of return. So slightly smaller internal rate of return, excuse me. So these are two things that we're going to want to consider. As well as profitability index, you can see that the electronic toy manufacturer doesn't have quite as much of a profitability index, so they are not making that extra profit for every dollar that is earned like the Children's Magazine. Also a slightly higher payback year and project costs. So while the 5-year EBITDA is higher, we are going to go ahead and select the Children's Magazine because NPV, internal rate of return, and payback is smaller. And selecting these other ones, we will want to consider the same things. Doll video game looks very profitable, low payback. Match My Doll clothing line, once again a very high NPV, high profitability, not a huge cost, but kind of a high payback. We will see about that. Once again, the Grow With Me doll line does have a large payback, so I will not be selecting that one. And go ahead and keep looking at these numbers, submitting our decisions. So it looks like we have once again increased our revenue, but operating and net income have decreased. Once again, this is still recoverable. Looking at cash flows, we can see that we did have a smaller number than we have in the past, but still expected to keep increasing over future projections. So looking at our historical finances, these numbers were, the earnings before interest and taxes were very close to what we were last year, but expenses and things like that did cause our net income to decrease. So when we are looking at our next project details, we can see some of these projects do have pretty desirable numbers, but what we are going to want to do once again is look at these discount rates and see what would help us and what might hurt us. Just trying to change it up, increasing these discount rates, we can see how this might affect some of our numbers. So that's a medium risk. Go ahead and select medium risk. You'll see these numbers change slightly. So on this section, we can see that some of these are very high, but they may not always have the highest payouts for our company. It looks like the virtual doll community is extremely high and looks very desirable, low cost, and low lifetime costs over the course of its economic life. First year, it will have a negative EBITDA, but in 5 years, it looks like that number will be increasing. Very small payback year, so that would be very desirable because we will be seeing our cash flows to recover from our initial investment very quickly. Profitability index is huge, so that's a good sign. Internal rate of return also very large, as well as net present value. So we are going to select that one. The music CD series, you can see, also has low cost, low payback years, and NPV and these numbers are still quite high. Design Your Own Doll and EDI Supplier Software System, while these ones do have the, as well as the equipment facility, these do have high internal rate of returns. Looking at some of these other numbers is where we might want to consider our decision. For the supplier software system, while it does have the highest internal rate of return, this number is significantly low, so that will not increase our company value significantly, so it may not be a good investment. So we're going to select Design Your Own Doll. Not quite a 10-year payback period, so feeling a little more comfortable with that decision, but it looks like our costs and things like that are still good. Lower than the Grow With Me doll line. Expansion to England looks like low cost. Net present value is still, it's greater than 1. And since we are not choosing this one for a larger than 10-year payback period, this would be our next desirable choice after the bookstore and cafe writers club. So we're going to go ahead and select these two right here and make our next decisions. And it looks like we have once again increased in all of our areas. So as you can see, retail has still increasing our revenue. Licensing does take up a larger portion of operating profit than it did in the past. It's not a bad thing. We're investing more. But as far as total assets, these numbers are starting to equalize. So looking at our cash flows, we can see once again positive number. This was increasing over last year, which is what we want, and still looking like it is increasing, so we are in the clear. For the income statement, once again our net income is also still projected to increase. And historical finances, as you can see, we have jumped that gap significantly. We are making profits now. So looking at more project details, we can see some more of the breakdowns of the individual projects, but going up to the ones that we are still going to be selecting. Medium risk, some of these numbers are good looking numbers, low payback period, high internal rate of return. Since it's licensing and it's medium risk, we can go ahead and decrease this number lower than the corporate rate, which will increase these numbers. So going ahead and doing this a few more times. Licensing, once again, this will be lower than the corporate risk. So we're going to do that a few times and make our decisions for this next year. So looking at these numbers, something that I have chosen frequently in my other simulations would be this Young Authors book series. It's got a high net present value, a high internal rate of return, and very high profitability, as well as a low payback. So we're going to see this profitability in 2.17 years, and it's very low cost for our company. So it looks like the next desirable situation, since in the previous years we did not choose these ones right here, we're going to keep looking at these ones down here. This cable TV program, while it's not the most high NPV, still has a significant internal rate of return. Lifetime project cost, not that high. Payback is not extremely high, but it looks like these numbers are not that significant in terms of making net income for our company increase. So looking at the next set of numbers, a high NPV, dollhouses with miniature dolls, these numbers once again look great. The payback is a little high, but not something that we won't be able to see in the soon future. As well as frequent shopper campaign, these ones do look pretty good as well. And something else to consider, when we look at these numbers, we do now have two that have a payback of greater than 10 years. So when we look at these, we want to compare. And while we didn't choose this one before, we may choose to select this project now, now that we do still have the budget to do so. Because looking at these projects, this one, the Grow With Me doll line, does have a very significant NPV compared to the children's accessory line. Internal rate of return is also higher. The children's accessory line does not look like it will be making us a profit to cover our investments, but the Grow With Me doll line will be making 62 cents for every $1 of investment. So payback years are both the same. Lifetime project cost looks like the Grow With Me doll line will be more costly if you compare them, but it will also yield us more money in the long run. So in our long-term strategy, that may be a better option. We have the ability to select a few more projects for our last group of selections. And so looking at these, when we compare these numbers, there's not a huge big difference since we are not choosing this one, but we're going to go ahead and choose the cable TV program and the assembly equipment because they do have the next highest numbers in terms of return, as well as the internal rate of return. Looks like actually we are going to strike this one. Not very high profitability, not very high net present value, and so we're going to submit our decisions. And it looks like we have a ending APV of 638.23, which is not bad considering it used to be 319. So looking at this, we have doubled our net income over our past 5 years, as well as operating income. So those are very significant numbers. We can once again compare these assets once again between production and retail are very close. But looking at these, this does look very good. Cash flows, once again, these numbers do equal out, and we still have a positive cash flow that has been increasing, which is what we want. So going back to our historical finances, this is where we can really see where we've come, and we have more than doubled our net income since 2009, which is very good. So looking at these, our assets have also increased, as well as shareholders' equity and liabilities, not necessarily a bad thing. Looking at our production, though that net income has increased, retail has increased, as well as licensing. Licensing has also doubled. So these numbers do look very good. So looking at these, we can kind of see exactly how our projects have done over the past 5 years, but we do have a very positive number that we're looking at here, considering the net income and operating income have doubled. So this just shows that by making these careful decisions and looking at all of these numbers when you make your project decisions, you can make some decisions that in the short run do seem like they may be hindering your company, but they will be profitable. They can be profitable in the long run. You just have to consider these numbers carefully. So what we got what we wanted. Our cash flows increased every year. Our net income increased. Our net income doubled. All of these things do look very good as far as a financial analysis goes. So it looks like that will be the end of this simulation, but we did have a very good 5 years. So